This is Heal Your Mind, Heal Your Body with Dr. Schuyler. Discover how your thoughts manifest disease and what you can do about it. Here's your host, Dr. Schuyler.
Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to Heal Your Mind, Heal Your Body. Today, we're going to dive right into a concept that many people have been asking me to talk about, and it is the concept, are you operating functionally frozen? Like, are you on autopilot, feel numb, almost as if you're watching yourself in a movie, disconnected? And one of the common things is, and I even did this myself back in the day, do you sit in the car for long periods of time after you've arrived home? Like you're just sitting there scrolling on your phone or just kind of numbing out. And there's really no reason not to go back inside. Like there's nothing bad waiting for you inside. You just kind of want a moment to yourself. You just want to just kind of check out of life before anyone else has, hey, mama, I need this. Hey, honey, where's this at? Or like after a shower, maybe you just sit there on your bed and you're just kind of zoning out, staring at the carpet, or you just find yourself not wanting to even leave the couch. You're just doom scrolling, just like this mental checkout. And this is one of the most common one. Men often hide in the bathroom because that is one of the places where people can't find them, and they'll doom scroll or look at YouTube videos. And it's just a way to have this freedom of checking out of reality where people don't want to, hey, I need this, I need that. It's this way of disconnecting from the world. But sometimes this form of mentally numbing out, it sometimes means you're missing doing something that you love. So there's a point in time where this becomes a normal behavior where we just kind of want to check out from reality. We don't want people bothering us. But there's also a point when it becomes very dysfunctional and very unhealthy. Oftentimes people with chronic fatigue or persistent depression, migraines, or just this general sense of disconnection from life. You might notice this. Or if you have chronic bloating or no answers with the chronic bloating or constipation, you're definitely not alone in this. These symptoms can stem from various sources, but one of the lesser known culprits that might be lurking beneath this chronic fatigue, chronic bloating, this sense of loss of self can be actually something called a dorsal vagal shutdown. So we're going to back into what we've talked about in the previous episodes is what is the vagus nerve? And we'll just briefly overview this to explain what this checking out of reality, this functional freeze looks like, which is just, from my experience, almost seems like at an epidemic level when I meet people and talk with my patients. So a little bit of back history from the previous episodes. The vagus nerve is what stretches down from the brain stem all the way down to the abdomen. And it influences things like the heart, the lungs, the digestive system, and it plays this really pivotal role in our autonomic functions. It acts like this critical communication link. It's overseeing these vital processes from your speech to your heartbeat to your digestion. So the parasympathetic nervous system, it has the vagus nerve helps us return from a state of calm following moments of stress or danger. And this brilliant theory called polyvagal theory introduces us to this dual nature of this nerve, the vagus nerve, that one branch fosters social connectivity, tranquility, rest and digest, but the other branch triggers this protective freeze response in the face of severe stress. It's similar to how an animal will play dead. It's this wild survival strategy. So this excessive stress can lead to an overreaction of this freeze mechanism that's inherently in all of us. And it results in this state of immobilization or the state of emotional, physical numbness. So this response, albeit it's this beautiful, brilliant defense mechanism, it can significantly impact your mental health, how you manage stress. And this is actually quite fascinating, and particularly for neurodivergent individuals who have on the spectrum disorders. They may experience these states more acutely or more frequently as opposed to someone who's neurotypical wiring. And I also am going to dive into this into the next episodes, people who are highly empathic or hyper-empathy experiences as well. So what exactly is this concept of freezing? And why is this seeming like a crisis where people experience this prolonged state of withdrawal and disconnection from self as it's attributed to this dorsal vagal shutdown? So to break it down a little bit, we have acute dorsal vagal shutdown, which is what we do to protect ourselves from danger. But then we have chronic. So what is the chronic? A chronic is when this dorsal vagal complex, this part of the vagus nerve, is triggering a significant withdrawal from your interacting with the external world around you. It can emerge from having this sensory overload, highly empathic, in this catching other people's vibes. And this sensory shutdown is an important topic for neurodivergents to understand as well as neurotypicals. So what does hyperarousal state look like? It looks like this dorsal vagal shutdown. It looks like you feel foggy, you feel confused, fatigued, lethargic, dislike or avoidance of exercise, dissociation, low motivation, slow healing of the wounds, and this sense of depersonalization. So this parasympathetic dominance can show up as depression and chronic fatigue syndromes. So when you look at hyperarousal, imagine our nervous system, it's like an engine in a car, and it can run at different speeds. So ideally, your engine runs smoothly, it's balanced, you can accelerate, and that's your sympathetic branch. You go to accelerate, you pull back on it. That's this normal state of your sympathetic branch. But imagine it's slowing down. It responds to something that we're on the road. So what happens when we hit this stressful situation? It's like pressing the gas pedal too much, like revving the engine really, really hard. And I described like being in second gear, but trying to go 100 miles an hour. This is called hyperarousal. And this is when we feel anxious or panicky, have a panic attack. On the other hand, our bodies operate in the opposite, where it's known as a dorsal vagal shutdown. Think of it like the brakes being slammed on, like you absolutely have to stop this fight or flight response. This is called hypoarousal, and this is when your alertness drops and your energy drops. So the state of hyperarousal can manifest in many ways. It's this sense where you feel paralyzed or detached. You're experiencing this sense of numbness, a lack of emotion when you typically would have had a lot of emotion, and even a physical collapse. So mental conditions like depression are often associated with a dominance of hypoarousal or dorsal vagal shutdown. And this is actually in contrast to anxiety and OCD tendencies, which seem to have more of a sympathetic, dominant, heightened arousal. So dorsal vagal shutdown serves as the body's emergency freeze response to the face of overwhelming stress, where typically one would be able to have a flight or fight response. When these options aren't viable, when you're not able to react in fight or flight, the body will do its natural defense and go to frozen. And it does this as this brilliant, brilliant way of conserving energy by minimizing the metabolic activity. So when your neuroception, your mind within milliseconds detects threat danger long before the sympathetic can kick in, we have this neuroception, this constant threat detection. So when you're constantly perceiving and scanning these potential threats, and this response is managed by the dorsal vagal complex within the parasympathetic. So it's this really innate primal survival strategy putting you into a temporary state of shutdown, facing what we perceive to be extreme danger or threat. Now, this was developed, back in the prehistoric age when we're thinking of a saber-tooth tiger in front of us. But what's happened is in our modern society, we are so flooded by so many stressors and attachment style, automatic negative thoughts, chronic invalidation, social media invalidation, that this prolonged state of hypoarousal, this freeze response, is in response to trauma, in response to neglect, in response to abuse, in response to overworked, in response to lack of self-care. So it's manifesting in these symptoms like fatigue, dissociation, emotional numbness, difficulty thinking clearly, even physical immobilization. It's called psychogenic syncope, which is a form of passing out, and I'll get into that later. So the body represents these physical symptoms as a way to navigate extreme stress to the point where it becomes significantly disruptive in daily functions. So understanding this condition, this is where this interplay between science and psychology takes place. It's understanding the deeper psychological issues when it comes to chronic stress or trauma, disease, as it relates to this dorsal vagal complex shutdown. And I've got to say, by far, the number one limbic response that I treat by far is a frozen dorsal vagal shutdown, a complex dorsal vagal shutdown, where it's been going on for a long time. So what do frozen symptoms look like? It looks like how I often see them is gas, bloating, a swollen face, like a cortisol bloat in the face, constipation. We talked about fatigue. This not a fear of leaving the house, but just not wanting to leave the house. Like going outside is just like a sensory overload. It's too much. And all the ways I mentioned before, like psychogenic seizures. And also what I've seen in a handful of neurodivergence is this form of non-psychotic, non-psychosis catatonia that's experienced in dorsal vagal complex shutdown. My favorite example, really good example, is Celine Dion with stiff person syndrome. I would, love to actually sit down and have a conversation with her and just help reveal to her, like, this is a chronic dorsal vagal complex shutdown, that when the brain is in limbic from grief and pain, the body's in limbo. In conditions such as thyroid and neurological issues, or even vitamin deficiencies can present as similar symptoms and should absolutely be considered in a comprehensive evaluation. But I also want to point out, thyroid disorders, neurological issues, vitamin deficiencies present as the same symptoms. So I often see people who've been cleared by all medical arenas you can imagine, but have all the same exact symptoms as neurological, thyroid, deficiencies. The brain is in limbic. The thyroid's in a prolonged fight response. It's exhausted. There's adrenal fatigue. It's exhausted being in a fight response, and it clicks down into a frozen response, a collapse of the nervous system. The mind becomes overloaded with life stimuli, and the stress and the culmination of past pains, memories, traumas, it all just floods in, and the mind becomes detached from the body. And I typically hear people, I'm like, hey, how's the universe treating you this week? That's one of my favorite questions. And I get it, meh. This sense of indifference. I feel sad, but I'm not able to cry. I feel like I'm faking being empathetic. And this is where you once may have had it in spades. You feel like you're just walking around functioning with a mask on in public. And the second that you're alone, or you're in the bath, or you're in your car, you feel like collapsing back into your sense of self, where you feel safe, you feel at home. Your social battery has been drained. You feel like you've overdrawn your own personal emotional bank account, and you're done having to pretend that you are okay. This is what functionally freezing looks like. When you're functionally frozen, you feel frozen, numb, detached. You lost your connection to self, to your emotions, to others, but your muscle memory is able to act like the old version of yourself. This is where emerging science and psychology comes together, the interplay between the mind-body connection with science and psychology. So why does feeling numb inside have to do with your brain? So this dorsal vagal shutdown, it's this natural response to you hitting the pause button when you're faced with extreme stress, like, stop, something's wrong. So the body's going to prioritize this, and it's going to actually reduce your pain signals, lowering both your mobility, you wanting to get off the couch, you wanting to leave the car, you wanting to begin to leave the house to exercise, as well as lowering your arousal levels. It's as if you are preparing for the situation it can't escape from, almost as if it's preparing for this significant immobilization response mimicking death, playing dead, playing possum. This often results from feeling extremely tired, numb, and disconnected from not only yourself, but from the world around you. It's your body's way of shielding itself from overwhelming situations. So especially for people who are neurodivergent, people who have autism, this dorsal vagal shutdown is this really key concept for understanding our distinct responses to stress. And this is going to apply to the next episode when I talk about people who have hyperempathy. So emerging science indicating that when compared to non-autistic individuals, we're more likely to experience a shutdown response of stress rather than fight or flight reaction. So this can manifest as an outward appearance of calmness, masking significant internal disconnection and, again, immobility, frozen. Recognizing this distinction is really important as it begins to shed this light on this profound, often invisible way in which stress impacts neurodivergent people. And then next week, we're going to get into hyperempathy and how this response impacts hyperempathetic people. So this dorsal vagal functioning, this dorsal vagal response is referred to tonic immobility. And I love the example of when a shark, you see those shark divers and they flip a shark over and they go tonic immobilized. Think of playing possum, a deer in a headlight. So freezing almost seems like it's a counterintuitive response. Like when tonic immobilized seems like, why would I play dead if I'm completely, in a life or death situation? But it's this primal part of the brain that we can't help but when we cannot escape, we cannot go anywhere, we cannot fight back, we cannot use our voice. The primal part of the brain kicks in. And so many of us today in society are walking around feeling we're on autopilot. We're nodding politely, we're smiling, we're laughing, but inside we just feel dead. I always like to share relatable stories when I convey these concepts, just to make them more applicable. So I had a female patient in her 30s, and when she was around her abusive partner, she would pass out for minutes at a time, like 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes. And her heart rate would drop to this dangerously low level, like 20 or 30 beats a minute. And she reported she had a measure of awareness, but she wasn't able to open her eyes or communicate. And I often hear this described also as well with a neurodivergent population. They're what's called the catatonia state, this non-psychotic catatonia state. They can kind of hear what's going on, but they can't interact with anyone around them. So this neurotypical woman is describing this processes to me that she had this modicum level of awareness, but she couldn't move or talk when she was passed out. She was immobilized. She was frozen. So I knew immediately she was having this dorsal vagal chronic shutdown response. So when she gets out of the abuse, this dorsal vagal chronic passing out, poof, cleared up. It's gone. So she's happy and healthy. She's living in peace. She's having no issues, no more passing out, no more chronic immobilization. And later she gets in a relationship with someone new, and she describes something like, something just feels off, but I can't quite figure it out. So I'm thinking, oh no, her body's telling her something that her mind is not yet aware of. So she's fast forward in this relationship and she starts passing out again, and she's staying down for minutes. And she's having these immobilization episodes again. But what's different is her partner is not yelling at her. He's not screaming at her. He's not hitting her. She's reporting no definable abuse. She was so confused. And at this point in time, the doctors are considering a pacemaker. Like, what's going on with her heart? Why is it going so low? There's no organic reason for this. Think back what we just talked about. The body almost as if prepares itself for death. Playing possum when we can't escape an attack, when we can't escape when a predator's coming for the prey. We play dead. We play possum, fainting goat, tipping cow, deer in the headlights. It's as if her body was preparing her with this dorsal vagal shutdown to prepare for an attack. So she kept seeing me, and then it went away for a bit, and it kept coming back. She goes about living life, and then she comes back again. She's like, listen, I'm still the same person, but it really turns out he was not the best human ever. He was someone who was chronically invalidating her. She was experiencing emotional neglect, a dismissive, avoidant a partner. If you look back to previous episodes, she was experiencing silent treatments weekly. Her partner had low emotional maturity, no accountability, and she reported he was like this subversively cruel as he guised his mistreatments in this ignorance. Oh, I call it these I call it the I don't know kind of human. I didn't know what I was doing was wrong. This complete learned incompetency, learned helplessness. It's as if she was experiencing, she reported someone who was so emotionally stunted, she felt like she was with an 8.5-year-old. And if you think, you have a child 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you're still teaching them morals and ethics and how to treat other people. But she was having to constantly teach this 35-year-old partner she's with how to be a human, how to treat them kindly. So she's living in chronic invalidation, and she's reporting this toxic merry-go-round of emotional neglect, loneliness, isolation. And she thought this was love because he wasn't screaming at her. She had high empathic intelligence. And this was slowly killing her from the inside. So she passes out as a result to prepare for this dorsal vagal complex. Her gut was telling her from the beginning something was off. But long before her mind could catch up, her body told her something's wrong. And after a period of some time, she finally had receipts. Like she had the proof, she had the evidence. She discovered he had amassed this web of lies, emotional betrayal, long line of shady behaviors. What's fascinating is she was actually diagnosed and hospitalized for broken heart syndrome. And the fun fact, and this is real, by the way, broken heart syndrome is real. And what's fascinating is when she reported back to the human she was with, I got broken heart syndrome, from learning about all the deceptions and the betrayals. He DARVO'd her, and anyone in the mental health industry knows what DARVO is. It's when you deny, attack, rage, victim, offender. And it's this form of you deny it, you attack the other person, you rage against them, you reverse it. The offender becomes the victim, and then you are the offender. So I like to call these kind of humans unicorns with the dark soul. They appear like a unicorn, 1 in a billion, but then they destroy you like the everyday devil. And Taylor Swift has a song called The Smallest Man That Ever Lived. But I really want to point out, this is not just men. I have about 3 male patients that are experiencing this well with their female partners. And they're experiencing this chronic immobilization. It's not men. Women sometimes are 10 times worse. So what this one was experiencing, and what a couple of the male patients I work with are experiencing, this chronic form of dorsal vagal shutdown from long-term abuse, even when it doesn't come in the form of physically yelling or screaming. And grief can also represent long-term dorsal vagal shutdown. And Celine Dion is my favorite example of this. She is diagnosed with stiff person syndrome, extreme frozen response. So what causes this extreme example of dorsal vagal complex? What is the science behind it? What is the history behind these chronic long-term immobilization? Why do we see at epidemic levels with symptoms and diseases this chronic dorsal vagal complex shutdown? We're going to dive into why this started in the next episode. As far as back, we're going to get into attachment style and how this forms in early childhood and what it looks like to have this as a child, what it feels like as a child, and why when we get older, are we more prone to having these episodes. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone that's coming back from a war zone. That when you begin to experience chronic invalidation as a child, your brain becomes then more wired to experience as an adult, especially with traumas. So Next episode, we'll get more into this. I do want to say that I now have 2 books coming out. The first one's Empower Your Child to Heal. And the second one is actually Empower Yourself to Heal. And this is talking about what we're talking about now. It's Empower Yourself to Heal, Merging Science and Psychology. 8 ways to master your mind to create wellness and stop disease. If you go to the website, drskyler.net, you're going to be able to actually download a chapter of the books, Healing Phases. And there's also different newsletters you get every month. And that's going to be sneak peek insight into the books and into the podcast more. Also, my team and I have developed a workbook. And this workbook actually is to be used in conjunction with the podcast. So it's like having a one-on-one session with me. When you go back and listen to the previous episodes, you can work with me one-on-one as we work through chronic invalidation, emotions, attachment styles. So this workbook was designed to work in conjunction. So if you can't see me one-on-one or can't see my team, you can actually use the workbook. I do have a retreat coming up in the fall, as well as a workshop. And if you want some more information, again, just go to the website and you can type in the subject line retreat or workshop, and my assistants will get some information to you. Feel free to find me. I'm new finally to Instagram and Facebook, and you can find me on Instagram with Dr. Skyler _ and Facebook with Dr. Skyler. And my website is drskyler.net. And abundant blessings to you all. And I look forward to diving more into this. Healing vibes your way. Finally, it's here, available for pre-order, my book, Empower Your Child to Heal. 8 ways to help your child overcome anxiety, GI conditions, and autoimmune conditions. And it gets into everything in great detail that we've talked about in the podcast so far. What are your child's secondary gains? How is their attachment style impacting their health? And it goes into 10 things that your children wish that you knew about their anxiety or GI or autoimmune conditions, and also gets into like what healing phases that they're in. So it really gets into all the things into great detail that we've talked about on the podcast, and it's available now on Amazon for pre-order. Thank you for your time. I feel so grateful you have listened to the end. When we begin to understand how our body manifests stress, trauma, depression, anxiety, and even unexpressed emotions, we then create a space, a bandwidth in our minds to begin to heal our bodies. Healing is a decision, and I am grateful for yours. Abundant blessings, Dr. Skyler.
To learn more about the work Dr. Skyler is doing, please visit drskyler.net. That's drskyler.net. And remember to subscribe to this podcast wherever you like to listen.
Produced by Audavita Studios. Connect your voice to the world.